Good morning, and welcome to First Parish in Brookline. Welcome back whether you've been coming for years or just joined us. And a very warm welcome to those who are here for the first time. We're so glad you're here with us today. It's so good to see everyone this morning. I'm Jerry Leader, and one of the worship associates here at First Parish. Our senior minister is Reverend Liza Perry Wood. Our guest minister this morning is an affiliate of First Parish, Reverend Eliza Blanchard, who offers bereavement counseling to those who have lost beloved animal companions, this among her other ministries. First Parish is a welcoming, Unitarian, Universalist congregation, open and affirming of all people, whoever they are, whatever your gifts or abilities may be, however you identify your gender or sexual orientation, wherever your life and faith journey has taken you, you are welcome here. If this is the first time visiting us, or you have not done so before, please take a moment to fill out one of the yellow visitor cards that you'll find in the clear plastic envelopes on the backs of the pews, and place it in the offering plate as it comes around. I have two announcements that are not in your order of service. One, the Thread of Hope Holiday Crafts Sale to benefit indigenous craftswomen in Guatemala will be happening right after the service today in Lion Chapel. And I've been down there to visit that display, and it's quite wonderful. I invite you all to be there. The second one is the RJAC would like to remind people about the rescheduled deep congregational conversation happening next Thursday night, November 28th at 7 p.m. After the service, everyone is warmly invited to join us for conversation and refreshments through this door to Lion Chapel. We encourage both newcomers and long-timers to pick up one of the striped mugs at coffee hour to signal particular interest in sharing conversation with the others you may not know or know well. Welcome to one and all. Come, let us worship together.
Welcome all to this time and space in our Spirit's home. With our love and questions, our hopes and fears, we come together this morning to awaken our spirits and our hearts, to open our ears and minds to what is most needful in order to engage the art of living more fully. This invitation to worship that I'm about to read is adapted from the words of Andrew Bacchus. Come in from the cold. Join us in making a religious home for ourselves and for others, if only for these brief moments, in spite of time, which shall soon bear us away from one another. Make this a family. Make us a religious family, if only in this space which we mark as sacred by our connections here and beyond. Come on in, make yourself at home, sing and love life. Sing and love life, and now you can do that actually by rising as you're willing and able to join us in singing hymn number 18, What Wondrous Love.
At this time, I would like to invite Janet Pritchard and David Fitch to come forward to light the chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith the world over. As they light the chalice, please join me in our unison affirmation printed in your order of service in English and then in Spanish. We give ourselves one unto another, covenanting to walk together as a congregation, promising faithfully to watch over one another and to delight for love to abide in our midst. No entregamos y nos comprometeremos a caminar promediando como llama, llevarnos mucho de canden, con hermanos, en el amor, pedimos. Each week, we also light 2 candles of peace, each candle representing a different place on earth that we want to lift up and remember this morning as a sacred encounter with the world. There are untold number of places on earth that need peace. Today we remember 2 places that we especially hold close in the service and through the week ahead. After each of the candles is lit, we will speak the words for peace in English, Arabic, and Hebrew. Peace, salam, shalom. The first candle is lit for the city of Chicago and those caught up in the tragic hospital shooting this past week. Peace, salam, shalom. Our second candle is lit for our planet Earth as we learned in Friday's report on climate change and its catastrophic impact on the world, human health, quality of life, the economy, and the natural systems that support us. Peace, salam, shalom.
Let us now join our hearts together in the spirit of prayer. It will be followed by a moment of silence that'll be opened and closed with the singing bowl. Spirit of life and spirit of love, we are so blessed for our presence together this morning, for the solidarity of our brothers and sisters in spirit out in the world. We come together this morning to practice gratitude, to remind ourselves of all of the things in our lives for which we can be grateful, small and large, for weddings, for babies, for in-laws, for even outlaws. Bless their hearts. We hold them all. We hold them all because we count on you to inspire us always to radical kinship, to knowing one another, to knowing sentient beings as kin, as family, to holding them and treating them as tenderly and with as much kindness as we too would like to be held. We come together this morning also to share our sorrows, to share our prayers and our thoughts and our hopes for those who are facing diagnoses, for those facing surgery and treatments, for those who cannot know what lies ahead. We also send out our healing, whole-making thoughts for those who are bereaved, for those who have suffered losses, whether of a job, of a beloved, of relationship. We hold them all this morning with as much love as we could muster, which is much love as we would like to see reigned on the earth, with the hopes that our prayers, our actions, our thoughts, our aspirations will bring about greater justice and greater peace on this weary world. Blessed be, may it be so, and amen.
There's a correction to the title of the poem printed in the order of service. It should read, "If We Do Not Venture Out," by Marnie Harmony. If, on a starlit night, with the moon brightly shimmering, we stay inside and do not venture out, the evening universe remains a part of life we shall not know. If, on a cloudy day, with grayness infusing all and rain dancing rivets in the grass, we stay inside and do not venture out, the stormy, threatening energy of the universe remains a part of life we shall not know. If, on a frosty morning, dreading the chilling air before the sunrise, we stay inside and do not venture out, the awesome, cold, quiet stillness of the dawn universe remains a part of life we shall not know. If, throughout these grace-given days of ours, surrounded as we are by green life and brown death, hot pink joy, cold gray pain and miracles, always miracles, if we stay inside ourselves and do not venture out, then the fullness of the universe shall be unknown to us, and our locked hearts will never feel the rush of worship. The offering will now be gratefully received. If you are visiting First Parish for the first time today, please feel free to let the basket pass you by. We are so glad to have you with us.
for all that you have given in time and treasure, and for all that we have received, we say thank you. Please join me in the responsive reading 589 in the back of your gray hymnal. I'm not sure the words will be up above, but I'll begin, and if you'll join me in the words in italic. Peace means the beginning of a new world. It means that nations are friends. It means joy to the world. Peace is quiet and calm. It is rest. It is silence after a storm. It is love and friendship. It is the world's dream of dreams. Peace brings comfort and happiness. It brings bread to the hungry. It brings prosperity to the nations. It means the strong respect the weak, the great respect the small, the many respect the few. It is like spring after winter. And I'd just like to point out the author of this responsive reading. The authors, I should say, are pupils of the Lincoln School. I just thought it was a wonderful thing to bring the children, some of whom are with us this morning, into the room in hopes for their future. And now I'd like to invite us all to rise as we are willing and able and join our voices together singing Every Night and Every Morn, number 17 in the gray hymnal. Please be seated. Good morning. Good morning. Keith told me that last hymn in some special hymn review book is labeled medium weird. which I frankly love, because frankly, I think life is medium weird most of the time if we're lucky. Yeah. So I'd like to start this morning by welcoming you all to a post-Thanksgiving medium weird service in which I hope and I pray that the words and stories I offer this morning will meet your heart and your mind's deepest needs. And I rest assured you will tell me at some point afterwards if that's not the case. I do like feedback. Kindly offered, but feedback. So if we stay inside ourselves and do not venture out, writes Harmony, our hearts will stay locked. No experience will be worthy of our awe or our reverence, she implies. The mysteries and the wonders of the universe will not be ours, not fully anyway, and we will be left out of the miracle that is the cosmos. What is your story about venturing out? What is our story as a covenanted community about venturing out? Who do we venture out toward? Who ventures toward us? When we're children, if we're very fortunate, we grow up surrounded by a measure of peace and love. Most of us do, sooner or later, encounter cold, gray pain, as Harmony writes, in the form early on, sometimes, most commonly perhaps, of name-calling and other verbal insults. Bullying in this way is a way people try to rob you of your story, force you to be someone you're not or be seen as someone you're not, force you to behave, perhaps, in ways you would not otherwise consider doing. Retaliation, withdrawal, shame, humiliation, whatever your response might be. Commonly, when this happened in my growing up, or to friends of mine, the adult response would be, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me or you." Well, we live in the 21st century, and what do we know about that? Words, language, names, they do hurt, and they can cause lasting hurt. A mother or father's words were cold comfort, however, because we know all too well how much harm can do, perhaps most especially to the innocent and the vulnerable. Words matter because they become part of the stories we tell ourselves, whether or not we want them to. And they can also, and I'm sure you're all very well aware of this, become one with the stories our culture tells about us and about other beings. Words, even carelessly spoken ones, even ones we think we offer in help, matter. And if you don't believe me, go on any social media site in the universe. You'll see it all there. Words matter in death as well as in life. For example, when people come to me after their beloved companion has died, sometimes they're seeking relief from the pain of things that people have said to them. Oh, your beloved dog or cat, rabbit, whatever animal it might be. Oh, she is in a better place. She is in a better place. This in the midst of raw grief, when the only better place the people I walk with know of is beside me or in my lap. People saying these words do not mean harm, but they are very harmful. Why? Again, because they are robbing the mourner of his story, they're making a different ending to this, making an ending to the story, and one in which the bereaved might not want to hear or be prepared to hear, or for other reasons, it might just not be their theology. We, I think, are people who are always aspiring, always trying to be mindful, more and more mindful of the stories that have been stolen from others, the stories that have been stolen from us, the plots that have been twisted, the motivations that have been ascribed. Words often live on after us, too, as stories. They make up, for good or ill, our legacy. What will be your narrative legacy? I think this is one of the most spiritual questions we can ask ourselves. What is the story that you are writing? And what will be our narrative legacy as a congregation? Last year or the year before, we celebrated our 300th anniversary of being a congregation. And there are many, many, many chapters in our story. Some of them are uplifting, and others not so much. Others should cause us to think carefully and act more mindfully as we go about our days. What part do you have in that story, or would you like to have? And of course, some stories are more powerful than others, depending on who tells them and where we are on our life's journey. Stories also can change, and I love that part of it. Stories can change, we can be transformed. And hopefully this place, the embrace of this community, is one of the places that is safe in which to confront other versions of our story and to perhaps enter into them and embrace them, even though it may seem frightening or scary to do so, to make a change, to become someone a little bit different, to see things a little differently. Stories can change, and they can help create a new and more life-giving legacy. For example, the stories that have been told about girls and women in particular have been changing, and hopefully about boys and men also. Especially these last few decades, I've witnessed, and the last 2 years even more so, some growing and abiding awareness. Following this month's election and the inclusion of more women and minorities in our United States' House of Representatives, our national story continues to unfold, and I think for many of us in very exciting ways. So our stories, which will become our legacy, give us new ways to view our powers and show us many of the ways also, I think this is true, many of the ways in which we are not alone. I think that's why we love stories so much. My husband and I have become, I confess, addicted to a series, a 9-season series. We're in season 3, called A Place to Call Home. And it's set in Australia. And we pretty quickly decided it was a soap opera, which surprised us both, that we find ourselves watching this pretty regularly, following these characters, the young and the old, the newborns and the town busybody, the town doctor, the town villain, and watching them is so helpful to us in this one way, I think. And I think this is true. ask me tomorrow, I might change my mind, because their problems, the things that they've suffered, the betrayals, the love, the unbelievable love they're shown, the misunderstandings are so human. And I think they make us feel less alone. But it's compacted into 45 minutes of sheer up and down, in and around, compressed human history, human story. I don't know, this soap opera somehow doesn't do this one justice, but maybe I'm just trying to make myself feel a little less guilty. Not as alone as we think we are. I think that is why, remember a few years ago they predicted that, reading was going to dwindle off, novels were going to die, and all that sort of stuff now that we have the internet. And it turns out there are more being published than ever, because novels, as science has shown us, help develop our empathy. Reading a novel, don't hold me to this, but reading a novel can be a spiritually deepening experience, if that is so, and science says it's so. Story. We enter in someone else's way of thinking, way of being. We may not agree with it, we may not like it, but we can't help, if we're engaged in the story, of learning from it. So this morning, I'm going to share 3 stories with you. 2 are fake, 2 are real, 1 is fake. You can figure it out, I'm sure. The first one is told by Kate Taylor, a reporter for the New York Times, and it just was reported right after the election. It's a story of Cassandra Levesque. She's from Barrington, New Hampshire. She lives in a trailer park with her mother and father and grandmother. And when she was 5, she became a Girl Scout. How many people here were Girl Scouts or Campfire? Wasn't that the other one? Yeah, she joined that. Her mother became the troop leader because she wanted her daughter to have more social experiences than she was able to in her neighborhood with kids after school. So she started this troop, and Cassandra joined in happily. And when she became when she was about 14, there was a project she needed to do for a badge, and it was to do a research some issue, some political issue. And so she did. And she found out that girls as young as 13 and boys as young as 14, which is about the age she was, could marry under state law if they had parental consent and the approval of a judge. Having just been 13 herself, Taylor writes, she said she thought it was crazy that girls in middle school with banned posters and stuffed animals and Barbie dolls, unquote, could get married. What do you all think the legal age of marriage in this state is? Just shout it out. It's the same as New Hampshire. Legal age of marriage in Massachusetts. What did I say? 14 for 13 and 14. Cassandra said, "Okay, I need to change this," she said. So at age 17, she led a campaign to end child marriage in New Hampshire and was brushed aside by a state legislator. He said he saw no need to change a law more than 100 years old, and this is a quote, on the basis of a request from a minor doing a Girl Scout project, unquote. She persisted. She got a bill together with the help of another legislator, Ms. Silly. In March 2017, the Republicans killed the bill using a procedural move intended to keep it from being considered again for 2 years. Quote, "It didn't make me want to stop, it just made me want to push forward," Ms. Levesque said. This year, she continues to work on this issue with Ms. Silly and several colleagues to pass a trio of bills which raised the minimum marriage age to 16 and gave judges more guidance on how to consider petitions for marriage licenses for people 17 and younger. So she didn't stop there. What do you imagine she did next? What story do you think this 17-year-old, now 19-year-old, created for herself based on this experience, based on having a wonderful mentor, Ms. Silly, in the House of Representatives? She ran for office. She ran for office. She ran for office. This is so amazing. Despite worrying about balancing political office with college classes and her commitments as a leader of her own Girl Scout troop. Also, she didn't know how she'd be able to get to Concord for the sessions. She doesn't have a driver's license. She debated and debated about this, of course, because these are considerable issues to address. Plus, they only pay $100 a year to people. So for a college student, that could be a considerable burden, the time versus the money. The very last day to file papers, she did so. She's now 19, she's a Democrat, and she became one of a group of young people across the country who were elected to office for the first time this year. So she wrote a very compelling story, all starting with her mother, her parents, her community, joining in, sponsoring a Girl Scout troop that led her more deeply to consider her place in the world and deeply to consider she could write a story. It didn't have to be written for her by others who might look at a young girl who did look at a young girl living in a trailer park, a Girl Scout, and say, we're not going there. Why would we consider that? It's an amazing story. An amazing story. The next story I'd like to share with you is a story of a friend of mine who's now passed away. I met her through a very dear friend and neighbor, and I got to know her over a period of 30 years. When I first met her, she was probably roughly my age, in her 60s. But Betty was born on a beautiful street in Berlin, Lindenstrasse. It's a tree-lined street, as you can tell by the name. She was born to the oldest of two girls, to a father who was a banker in Berlin. He also happened to be a World War I vet. She had a sister. Her mother was very active civically. They were Jewish, but they were secular Jews. She did not grow up going to temple. They were the kind of people who consider themselves Germans first. But we can imagine in the early 30s, when Betty was probably about 10 or 11, things changed for people like her. And her father was not thinking that he would have to leave. He did not feel afraid. After all, he was a veteran and a banker, good standing in the community. And he had family. She had grandparents and aunts and uncles as well, who also did not feel early on the need to move. However, her father's German friends in the bank said, "You have to leave. You have to leave as soon as you can, and we will help you." He debated for a while. He tried to get his mother to go. She refused. But things began to get more and more desperate as the laws tightened around what Jews could wear, where they could go. And finally, he agreed. His friends helped him get some of his money out. They did something else, too, which it's an interesting part of the story. They offered to store his furniture down in the deepest vaults in the bank in Berlin. The reason I say it's an odd thing to offer in some ways. In another way, it's a hopeful thing. You will be back. We will take care of these things. Don't worry. We will be here. They will be here. This will pass. So Betty and her family left. They went first to London and then to New York City, where she went to high school and she became a secretary. And in the course of that, she met her husband, Herbert, who was a salesman and rose in the ranks to become a manager of appliance company. So he traveled all around, and they finally ended up in the Boston area, where they had one child who became a good friend of ours. And he had 3 children. And as they grew up and grew away, she was a wonderful hands-on grandmother, perhaps because her own grandmother was lost in the war. Her grandmother didn't leave. Many family members were lost in the war. As I got to know her, we would have lunch together pretty regularly, and afterwards she would invite me back to her apartment. And I remember hearing the story about the furniture one day when she pointed out a desk in her living room, an old-fashioned desk with dark wood and delicate yellowed inlay in it, vases of flowers and such. And she said, yes, this is the furniture. They sent it to us after the war. I have some, my sister has some. There were 3 or 4 pieces, big pieces, not something that, you could knock down a la IKEA, big pieces of furniture. Someone had paid attention, someone had stayed loyal to the memory of a friend. So she and Herbert, the children grew up and they went away, the grandchildren grew up and went away, and she and Herbert, meanwhile, discovered a love of traveling. They also loved to learn, and they particularly loved to take the courses at the Harvard Adult Education Program on European history. Herbert even taught a couple of those courses. You're allowed to do that in that program, which really must have been fun. So they would study and read and learn about things voraciously and then travel to some of these places, mostly European places. As Herbert got older, he was a little older and less able to travel. They traveled less and less. But after he died, Betty decided to take a cruise, one of those smaller riverboat type cruises, which was perfect for her. And she decided, I remember she kind of surprised herself, she decided to take one down the Rhine, which is, of course, the mythical river of the German people, among others. And I asked her if she was going to go back to Berlin, and she decided not to go back by herself. But she did go on the cruise, and they stopped at beautiful towns along the way, and often, they would have these meals at the windows looking out at these towns. And one day, a young waitress, a very young girl, a German girl, paused as she was clearing the table, and Betty had gotten to know her a little bit, and she finally leaned over and she said, Betty, I'm so sorry for what we did. And Betty, as she recounted it to me, was a little taken aback by this. And she looked at the young woman and she said, but you did nothing. You did nothing. Please don't feel badly. So, that is a story that I carry with me, because I honestly can't say how I would write that story if it had happened to me. I don't know in my heart of hearts if I would have the power to say, please don't feel badly. Stories can make us less alone. That young woman had heard a story, a painful, powerful story, a difficult story, and she had chosen a way that she wanted that story to end. She wanted it to end with remorse and sadness expressed to somebody who was a victim of what had happened. As a result, she may not have been planning on it, but she received forgiveness. So, in this season of light, our stories can also offer light. We've already, people in our communities have celebrated Diwali, a festival of lights. We are looking forward to solstice, and then Hanukkah and Christmas and Kwanzaa. All of them feel candlelight, and all of them have stories connected with them, all kinds of stories. But this morning, I'd just like to focus for our last story on the story that, for as far as I can tell, 300 years, this congregation has told itself. And we tell it every time we have a pageant, a nativity pageant. We tell the story over and over and over again. And so I'm going to talk briefly about it because Christian stories are, whether we like it or not, agree or not, believe or not, they are the water we swim in. The air that we breathe in this country, whether we like it or not. So paying attention to these stories can be very helpful, I think, to understanding where other people who might not share our beliefs and our understandings are coming from. So it's the story of Mary, and I want to share the story from the point of view of historical Mary, as what little we can know of her. In Galilee, a young woman, probably about 13, a marriageable age in those days. Things don't change much, do they? She would go out, scholars postulate, she would go out to gather wood, to get the water, on the hillsides in Galilee. Galilee had just been ravaged by Roman soldiers. Roman soldiers had come to the area to put down a rebellion in the nearby town of Sepphoris, which was a very Roman, Greco-Roman city that many Jews in the area were becoming more and more attracted to. There were jobs there. There was a gymnasium there. This was a lifestyle that was sophisticated and offered a different view into the world than they were used to. Some scholars speculate that Joseph and then Jesus and his brothers may have been not carpenters having a shop, but day workers going into Sepphoris to build things there, to work on things there. Anyway, Sepphoris had been ravaged, the rebellion put down. Scholars speculate that the hillsides around where Mary was in Galilee, where she grew up, were perhaps had hideouts for some of the Jewish rebels. In any case, Mary got pregnant. Back in the day, if a young woman was pregnant, scholars also tell us that the people of Galilee would call that child a child of God. A child of God, and the child would be raised in the villages. The canonical Gospels tell us that Joseph married Mary in spite of her pregnancy. He may have been planning to divorce her. We don't know what happened. We can't know for sure. But we do know that this story that ends up with this homeless couple going to pay their taxes in Bethlehem, cold, hungry, very pregnant, was taken in not by humans, but by animals in a stable. That's my take on it. That's my midrash. And I love that St. Francis of Assisi brought that reality back to the story. The animals hadn't always been there. It was his doing when he developed a living tableau, like our pageant. He brought animals. So all classes in the story as it evolved bring gifts to this baby Jesus. He's here to represent, his birth represents a new order, innocence, justice brought into the world, justice made manifest. Jesus, we often forget, grew up to become a radical Jewish reformer. Even today, many who claim to follow him don't always pay careful attention, I think, to what he did and what parts of Jewish scripture he understood to be most needful, especially in such a hard time of Roman occupation, an impossible time for so many of his people. As far as biblical scholars can tell, Jesus preached a kingdom of God, and he lived it. He lived it, as I said earlier, by basically performing acts of radical kinship. In this kingdom of God, which he said is here and now, tax collectors, who are the bane of everyone's existence, sinners, so-called unclean women, mentally ill, blind, all who were normally shunned. And illness was thought to be a punishment from God by some people, then as now, so they were all shunned. But he welcomed them all at his table. This was huge. This was ginormously life-altering for the people who heard and believed this message and saw it in action. Because he did eat with these people. Just bread, fish, whatever was at hand. It was threatening beyond belief to the powers that be. It's hard for us to realize this, but it's true. His coming into the world was meant to change us so we could see clearly, more clearly, a world held by bonds of kindship. It's a root word. They're related, kinship, kindship. Love one another as you would be loved. Treat one another as you would want to be treated, with tenderness and kindness. So we know that stories, both real and made up, help us develop empathy. Stories like the Nativity promote our sense of oneness, of kinship, and even with animals, I'd like to add. So at this, the seemingly dying time of year, let us hold tight to the knowledge that what appears as death, what we experience as sorrow, may open us wide to embracing the kinship of all, may make us kinder as a result, more able to listen, to learn, and to love. As Naomi Shihab Nye says in her poem, Kindness, before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows, and you see the size of this cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters, to purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you have been looking for, and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. The living know that suffering and loss are some of the most universal of human experiences. During this coming season, may we reflect on the universal truth of shared suffering and loss in order to rise up in one strong and loving body. Let us love and love and love the hell out of this earth. Blessed be. And now let's join our voices by rising as we are willing and able to sing, We Are Building a New Way.
We
build a new way, getting stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. Hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We feed every need. We can feed every need. We can feed our every need. Start with love, that is the seed. We can feed every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Without peace, then we will die. Peace and freedom is our cry.
Please join me in our unison affirmation as Reverend Eliza extinguishes the chalice. We extinguish this flame and not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us and offer as gifts unto the world. Please take the hand of someone near you for the benediction.
Now is the time to free ourselves from secrets, from loneliness, from the shackles of untold and unheard stories. Now is the time to listen with all our hearts to the wisdom of the living and those dear dead. Now is the time to write or paint or sing, to share, to dream our lives into shining webs of kinship, creating a legacy of deeper peace for all who will come after. May your life be a blessing, and may all your days be blessed. Amen.